Hello, everybody, and welcome to this fantastic theatre. Thank you very much for coming. Good afternoon, and welcome to this London Citizens Dialogue. As you may know by now, this is one of a series of events which has been organised across the European Union, and it will culminate in an event in Brussels at the end of March. It's a very appropriate time, I think, to be having this debate with you, members of the public, because, as we know, the EU stands at something of a political crossroads. In May, we have the elections to the European Parliament, and then later this year, we'll have a change in the College of Commissioners, the people sitting at the top table at the European Commission. And this is your chance, as members of the public, to have your say about the future direction of the European Union. And our discussions today will be broken down into three themes. The first one will look at the response to the economic crisis, which has dominated a lot of our thoughts, and certainly I, as a reporter for the Western Morning News, that's my old paper, for the Financial Times over the last few years. The second is what your rights mean for you as a citizen of the EU. And finally, we'd like to talk to you about your ideas for the future of the European Union. I should just say a couple of things about myself. I'm the political editor of the Financial Times. I previously worked in Brussels. Whilst I was in Brussels, I was occasionally heckled by some of my fellow journalists for asking slightly difficult questions, and I was regarded in Brussels as possibly the most Eurosceptic member of the press corps. Now that I'm back in Westminster, I'm frequently regarded as the most pro-European journalist in London, and I suspect the answer to that lies somewhere in between. It may say something about the different journalistic cultures in Brussels and at Westminster. So each section today will start with a couple of questions which have been submitted to the online dialogue, which has been running since October last year. Then I'll open the debate out to members of the audience in the room, and I'll be taking questions from social media, and I have a screen here, so do feel free to contribute to the debate using social media. The hashtag, you'll see it there on the yellow screens, is hashtag EUDEB8. Deb8. Now, the ground rules of today's debate, and we are in London. We are in possibly a place where the debate on the European Union is at its most ferocious. I'm hoping for a very lively exchange of views today, views from different sides of the spectrum on Europe. The only thing I would say is let's try and keep it a polite debate. I want to hear views made strongly, but without causing offence to anybody in the room. And also, I'd like people to keep their questions short as well. This is meant to be an exchange of views, a conversation with our guests here today, not a chance to make speeches. So if I feel that anyone's wandering into the realms of declaiming and starting to make a speech, I will intervene. And people sitting outside the room can email to the address on the screen. They can also use Twitter or Facebook to take part in the debate. Now, the other thing I should mention at the start here is that on your chairs, you will have all found a voting pad. We will be pressing these into use before too long. At various times during the event, you'll be asked to vote on questions that come up on the screen. When the question comes up, you press the appropriate key that reflects your response, and you can change your mind and vote again once the light has flashed green. So you can change your selection before the end of the voting process simply by pressing another button. And all of your votes are anonymous. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today, the people who will be at the heart of the debate as we proceed over the next couple of hours or so, and invite them to say a few words. And I remind my colleagues here that I'm going to be as strict with them in terms of time limits as I will be with members of the audience. On my right is Viviane Reding, a Vice President of the European Commission, the Commissioner for Justice, Fundamental Rights and Citizenship. People sometimes say that European commissioners are unelected. Well, I was reminded by Mrs. Reding yesterday that she is elected as a member of the European Parliament in Luxembourg. When I was in Brussels, working in Brussels, I was reminded of her great political skills, because it was Viviane Reding who pushed through the EU reforms on roaming rights, mobile phone roaming charges. And I remember there was a bitter rearguard action fought by a number of commissioners from the big states, including our own Peter Mandelson, and you managed to somehow get this through the College of Commissioners, which I thought certainly Peter Mandelson was taken by surprise somewhat at finding himself outmanoeuvred and outvoted. On my left is David Lidington, the British Minister for Europe. I know from my time in Westminster he's highly respected. He is known in every corner of the European Union. He's been to every member of the European Union, member state of the European Union. I was saying beforehand, he's now on his second lap. He's known to be courteous. He has an encyclopedic and slightly worrying knowledge of the European treaties and has been known to go toe-to-toe with Bill Cash, who certainly has an encyclopedic knowledge and possibly something beyond that. And this is probably going to tempt fate, but he is also tipped by some of his colleagues as being a future member of the cabinet. So, with no more ado, I'm going to open the debate with some opening remarks from you, Viviane Reding.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here in this wonderful setting. I have been reading a little bit about the history of this place. Now, that was the place for the popularization of science, where it really started. Not only science among scientists, but science also towards the general public. And actually, what David and I am here for today is a popularization of European politics. That is at least our aim. And our aim is certainly not to make speeches, because you hear all the time speeches of politicians. You are not here for that. You are here for asking a question and getting an answer. And that is what we will try to do. This is not a first, but it is the number 44. We have had public dialogues, citizens' dialogues all over the place. North, south, east, west, in easy places, like in Luxembourg, my place, difficult ones, like in Greece or in Spain, where young people have to strive in order to find a way out. But they were very fascinating, because I think the general public got to learn as much as I got to learn. Because by asking questions to me, you tell me so much which I need to know in order to take the right decisions. Why did we start with the dialogues? For a simple reason, we had made an analysis, a poll, a European poll, if you want, to see what people think about Europe. And there was an answer which was very striking. 2/3 of the Europeans, I speak in average, feel Europeans, but only 1/3 knows what that means in average. Now, there we got a problem. I think people should know what it means and then take a political decision when they go to elections. That is everybody's private, personal decision. But before you take a decision, you should know what kind of decision you take, for what purpose, and what will be the consequence of that decision. And that is why David and we decided to be here with you today, to listen to your questions, to learn from your questions, and to try to give, for my part, an as objective answer as I can.
Many thanks, Ms. Reding. David Liddington, over to you.
I mean, like Vivian, I shall try and keep this as brief as I possibly can. I mean, it's good to be here. I think one of the things I welcome about these dialogues is that it is trying to open up debate about the future direction of Europe to perhaps a wider audience than customarily focuses upon EU matters. There'll be things I suspect that Vivian and I will be in agreement on, other things where we may disagree, and it's good that we're able to debate these matters openly in a spirit of mutual respect. When I look at the European Union scene today, what I see is a Europe that has great achievements to its credit, but which does need to change and adapt. That's in part for economic, but also in part for political reasons. On the economic front, roughly 1 in 4 young people across our continent is now out of work. And if we want to afford the standard of living and the public services we've taken for granted across Europe, we have got to raise our game on competitiveness in the light of what is happening in Asia and Latin America today. And that means pressing forward with the sort of work on improving and deepening the single market that George alluded to, and he referred to Vivian's achievement over roaming charges. We've got to do more on services, more on energy, more on transport. It means we have to do more free trade deals like those accomplished with Singapore, Canada, Korea in recent years. We need to cut the cost and complexity of regulation on our businesses, especially the SMEs, on whom so much of our hope about future employment growth depends. And then on the political side, it's not just in the UK that we are seeing huge public disaffection with how Europe is today. If we look at the Eurobarometer research, that's showing that in most EU member states, the majority of people are saying they don't think their voice is heard. And that's something that ought to be worrying all of us, whatever political background we come from. And my argument would be that Herman Van Rompuy was right when he said, Europe is not a country. It's not like the US. And we need to remember we are a union of 28 different nation states. So I would argue that part of the answer to Europe's difficulties now is to give that stronger voice to national parliaments and national governments through the Council in how Europe operates, to try to demonstrate to people that their voice really is being heard and that there are channels to make sure that European decisions are held accountable to the voters whom we are all there to serve.
David, thank you very much. Now, before we get started, I'm going to get you to test out your voting devices. There's been a lot of commentary over the years about the so-called democratic deficit in the European Union. Sometimes when I worked in Brussels, I wondered whether actually there was almost a surfeit of democracy. It was always difficult to sell stories to a news desk, which was asking, is this the final stage in the decision? And you say, well, it's got to go through various other stages. But nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that some, indeed many European citizens feel disengaged from the process in Brussels. So what I'm going to do is get you to vote on the question, do you feel your voice is heard in the European Union? So if you could push your buttons now, that would be excellent, and we'll see whether this works. Oh. So 34% agree that their voice is heard in the European Union. 44% say they disagree. 22%, that's a high percentage of people who don't know. Come on, we need to be slightly more decisive than that. But nevertheless, I think that probably is a fairly good reflection, I would have thought, of the state of public opinion, which is they feel that often their voice is not heard in the European Union. So that's why we're here today, to make your voices heard. So we're going to move on to the first theme of today's debate, which is about how the European Union should deal with the economic crisis which has gripped the continent since 2008. And David was just setting out there some of the reforms the British government thinks are necessary, liberal-minded reforms, deregulation, the kind we talked about mobile phone roaming charge, for example, deregulation, more competitiveness, free markets, free trades. And of course, there's an alternative vision set out by the likes of François Hollande in France, who thinks that social protection is an important part of the way the European Union responds to the economic crisis, as well as solidarity between member states. So I'm going to open it up to the floor now. And our first question comes from Nathaniel Smith. Nathaniel, yes.
Hi, Commissioner Reding.
You get a phone?
There's a roving microphone coming around.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so one of my frustrations since 2008 was that a lot of the economic policies to address what happened seem to have been kind of papering over the cracks rather than looking a bit deeper into the causes of it. And it's a bit frustrating for me, and I think for others, seeing since then that we've kind of gone back to growth, almost growth at all costs, and that's the kind of message we're hearing from ministers again. So rather than that, I'm wondering if we're seeing any activity in the EU to kind of get away from that and instead of GDP, adopt alternative or complementary measures like the Social Progress Index, which I know is being trialled in Paraguay at the moment, and also incentivizing business rather than just for growth, but also for social and environmental benefit, like community interest companies in the UK or cooperatives or employee ownership models. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Over to you, Viviane.
Yeah, well, as the answer of this, I appreciate very much that young people think about how we could develop our models, because we have several ones in the European Union, to be more efficient. And we are all working on this. But you must know that in order to get out of the crisis, you cannot intellectually think about new models. You just need to do it. And that is what was necessary to be done in order not to leave countries to go bust. I still remember 2 years ago when I was in Davos, Nouriel Roubini said, well, Greece was going out of the European Union in 12 months, and the euro was going to be disappearing, and Europe was in shatters. Roubini didn't say anything anymore this year in Davos. I think he was a little ashamed to see that all this hadn't happened. Why didn't it happen? Because the heads of state and of government and the national parliaments and the European Parliament decided that it wouldn't happen and that we would fight to keep every member of the family on board, that it would be a fight where solidarity is given for solidity. And you have seen that a lot has been achieved. Take your neighbor, Ireland. Ireland was under very heavy stress. Why? Because its banking system just did not behave as it should. And it had to be paid out by the national budget. And then the national budget was in shambles. Now, what we have done all together is to set up a system, a banking union, that this doesn't happen anymore, that our banks are controlled before they do the things which will make a whole country to crumble down. So we have been building up in management very quickly in a time when things needed to go quickly. Now this has been partially achieved for those member states who were really in trouble. Nobody has gone out of the euro. Even one supplementary country came in. Others are in the waiting list. No country has gone out of the European Union. Even one, Croatia, has come in. Others are on the waiting list, so that's fine. Now we have to solve the problem, and David made it very clear, and that is a basic problem. This huge number of unemployed youth who do not see any future in front of them. And that is a problem you cannot, and there I speak from my political point of view, you cannot solve that problem with subsidies. It is, and you cannot solve that problem by decree either. It's not that I make a law in Europe, now we eliminate, as from tomorrow on, youth unemployment, that will happen. What we need to happen, and that is that the SMEs, the small and medium-sized industries, are those who create 95% of employment in all the European Union. So there we have to give a helping hand. Those have to come in. And you know that in some of our member states, the SMEs do not get money anymore from the banks. They are not financed anymore. And some of those are in very big difficulties because they do not have the liquidities they need. So there we are in the next coming months going to insist. And then also for the new systems, for instance, social companies. We are helping them in order to get started. The digital agenda in order to have the startups to be developed much stronger. I know, for instance, David, you have here in London a very strong point to help internet startups to grow. Yeah. We developed some of those all over Europe in order to help young people with entrepreneurship to go ahead, because that is the only way to get rid of the big problem we have now, and where we have to help these young people to see the light at the tunnel and to get out. And I must tell you one last thing. I know you already tried to calm me down. You're right. This is number 44, Citizens Dialogue. I remember my Citizens Dialogue in Thessaloniki, in the north of Greece. That's a university city, with 100 young people standing in front of me and challenging me what for their future. Now, in the end, we were all crying together. Sometimes also you have, as a politician, to cry, but not to stop then. After that, you have to dry, and then you say, okay, Now we get it done. And that is exactly what we need to do. And that we have to do together. Not only the European Union, also the member states. We have to give a helping hand. We have to help the SMEs to develop. We have to help the creativity in our continent to develop again in order to give young people hope. And then it will be for your generation. When we have solved this, we give you the responsibility. And then you develop this into a happy continent where a happiness is also calculated and not only money. Good.
Great, thank you very much. Now, that was slightly longer than I'd anticipated, Commissioner, but I'll let you get away. I'll let you get away with it next time. Now, to go back to Nathaniel's question, David Lidington, are we going for growth at all costs, and are there better measures of growth? And I think David Cameron used to talk about having some sort of happiness index, which I haven't heard so much about recently. I don't know what happened to that.
I mean, I haven't. I'm not arguing at all for growth at all costs. I think that there's a place for all sorts of different indices. I think I'd argue about whether those necessarily have to be created at government level or EU level, and there's a lot of good work done by universities and think tanks, find different ways of measuring relative performance in different countries. There's a strong place for social enterprise, quite right. And I'd certainly argue that the UK has a very good track record here. I was reading one of the papers even this morning about a new tax relief that is being provided for social impact bonds to try to stimulate extra social capital, extra investment in the social enterprise sector. You're right to say that the 2008 crisis laid bare the extent to which there had been in some places some poor quality regulation of the banking sector, but also, let's face it, there were grossly irresponsible decisions on borrowing and lending that were taken by governments and by private sector institutions both. And those countries, including the UK, that have had the greatest difficulties since 2008 have tended to be those countries that didn't actually strive to make the books balance when the times were good. And those countries that took the right prudent decisions during the good times are better off today as a result. But I quarrel with some of the premise there. I mean, I think I go back to what Viviane said about those young unemployed people. I mean, one of the most dispiriting things as an elected politician, you go knocking on doors in the area you represent, and you meet somebody who is 19, 20, 22, just out of school or just out of university, and they can't get a job. And they've come out with so much in the way of hope and ambition and aspiration, and they cannot get their foot on that ladder. And that's not just a lack of material well-being. That is an incredibly demoralizing experience for those people that, if you're not careful, can embitter an entire generation. So I would argue that yes, we need lots of other things too, but we really have in Europe at both member state and EU level got to focus on the things we need to do to generate growth, to create the jobs and the standards of living that we need and expect in a rapidly changing global economy. And that takes us back to liberalizing work on the single market in sectors that have not yet been thoroughly reformed, and it means reducing the complexity of regulatory costs for SMEs in particular, and it means embracing the opportunities that globalization presents to sell to tens of millions of more customers in those newly industrializing, growing economies around the world.
Great, thank you, David. I'm going to throw it open to the floor now. So who else would like to? Yes, sir. Have a microphone coming.
On behalf of New Europeans, Europe's global city. May I ask the Minister, please? David, you and I, and all of us here, most of us here, I think, are all citizens of British citizens, but we're also European citizens. Do you see the value of European citizenship? Do you see the importance of the values that underpin it? That people are calling for these values in the Ukraine, on the streets of Ukraine at the moment. Do you not see that it's nothing to be afraid of, this European citizenship that we have in addition to our British citizenship? And Commissioner Reding, what are you going to say to David Lidington or his successor in a government when Britain threatens to leave the European Union, and I'm glad that you've reserved so many seats for the Eurosceptics. It's a pity they didn't come. What are you going to say to David when he says to you, we don't want to have any more freedom of movement. We just want freedom of capital movement, freedom of goods and services. But we want to be like Switzerland. What are you going to say to Switzerland, who've just said that? And what will you say to a British government if they ever say that to us as well?
Okay, very topical question. We'll go to David first on that.
Roger, I mean, you'll know as a former member of the Westminster Parliament that, when you speak to people on the street, what they identify with most is their own country and its institutions, and that's where they look first for representation. And I don't believe that there is a European demos at the moment. I think that what is needed is certainly, there are certain rights, benefits that accrue to everybody across all 28 member states from their membership of the European Union. And I would argue that I went to the Maidan and I saw the flags there, and I did note the contrast between what you could expect if you came back to London. And I've been very struck going around the Balkans, too, by the extent to which today the EU remains, for those ex-Yugoslav republics, a magnet, a beacon, precisely because of the values, because the process of negotiating membership and going through all the tests and hoops that involves has provided us with a way of institutionalizing the rule of law, democratic institutions, and human rights that we didn't have back in the 1920s. Those 20 years after World War I, all those new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe collapsed under strains of one sort or another. Since 1989, look at that 20 years, we've been much more successful, and I do believe that that process of joining the EU, that institutionalizing those values, has been a key explanation of that. What I would ask, though, in return, is that everyone throughout the EU recognizes the need for diversity, the need to respect national difference, that some countries may want to move towards a much more closely integrated political union. Others will choose not to do that, and we should accept and acknowledge that diversity in a sort of spirit of mutual respect.
David, can I just ask very quickly before I bring in Mrs. Reding, how do you account for the fact that in former Yugoslavia, Ukraine comes to that, the European Union flag is seen as a symbol of hope and a European future, and in Eric Pickle's department in London, he has to hide the flag in a basement bar? What's going on there?
I think the reality is that the EU flag is not seen in this country as a sort of a great badge that people want to say. Actually, the lesson there is to ask us, why is it that people don't want to show it? And if you go around Central and Eastern Europe, it is flown freely because that is what people want to do. And I do think that flag flying should be a matter of personal choice, preference, derived from a genuine sense of pride, wish to demonstrate that identity. I don't think that if you seek to impose it via sort of government from London or from Brussels for that matter, it's actually going to have the desired effect.
Well, David made it very clear that Europe is cultural diversity, and that is how it should be. I'm Luxembourger. I'm coming from a proud country with its own language, its own culture, having the Luxembourgian flag, the European flag, and knowing why. Because we have been neutral several times in our history. That was when we were swiped away. First World War, Second World War. We do not want this to happen anymore. We want our freedom. We long our independence. And I always say to my voters, if we want to keep our culture and our language, the only way to keep it is to be in the European Union. And that is also something the Ukrainians have understood. They want freedom, they want self-expression, they want democracy. And they know they can only get it to be free people when they are in the European Union. And I tell you, it sometimes makes good when you see people in the snow, in the cold, with a European flag and saying, please, 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 Europeans, free us. And we will free them. Now, having said that, how are this influence of what has happened yesterday in Switzerland, for instance, does this have an influence on us? And is it possible to have a European Union in bits and pieces? Now, I am very happy that David underlined very strongly, and I agree with him, that it is so important that we are a union of people. We are not only a market. The market is important for people to live, for people to have jobs, and we have to develop this market and we have to make it stronger. But in the end, it is for the people to live well. And so you cannot separate market here and only market and then something else in the distant future. No. And that is why the basis of the European Union are the 4 freedoms. You quoted them. The freedom of movement for capital, I think this city is interested. The freedom of movement for goods, for services, we have a lot of work to do on the services. And the freedom of movement for citizens, who are all respected to be the same in their diversity. I am not a Brit, I will never become a Brit, and you probably will never become a Luxembourg in the way of thinking, because I have my roots, you have your roots. And you should respect my roots, I will respect your roots. And the two, we can live together very well. I have a multiple identity, by the way. I'm coming from the steel industry in Luxembourg, fighting people, you see. I'm a product of the steel industry. And then I'm a Luxembourger, this small country in between 2 big cultures and managing to survive its own culture in between the Germanic and the Roman empires. And then I'm a proud European. And the 3 go very well together. And my happiness measurement to the young man here is very high. I love Europe, I love Luxembourg, and I love to be here now.
Great, thank you very much. So, in the 3rd row. Microphone coming down.
Thank you and welcome to the United Kingdom. I hope, Chairman, that you'll allow us a little more time, given the length of the answers from the politicians. This is a dialogue
Indeed,
with citizens,
you're very point well made.
A set of speeches, and so far we haven't heard many of the views of citizens. My question, and I hope you'll allow me to comment afterwards, is to ask our visiting commissioner, given her fine words about support for small industries, what has the European Commission actually proposed and enacted via the processes to reduce the burden on small businesses? What legislation are you actually getting rid of? Because all I see is a constant machine of new directives, new burdens, new costs. And if you're running a small business and having to decide whether to take an 18-year-old on, you are going to look very carefully at paternity leave and costs and all these things. And if I may just finish by commenting, we need a Europe that operates at different speeds. I love Europe, I love European food, I love travelling, I love European people, but I don't love the European Union, and I don't want a European army, and I don't want a European flag, and I don't want a European passport. I'm British, and I don't want European political union. We haven't voted for it. We joined an economic common market, which became an EEC and is now an EU union. You lecture us about the growth of extremist groups. It's nothing to be extreme to love your country, to want to have control over how money is spent, to have control over your borders so that based on economic needs, you decide who is going to enter this country, whether they have the skills that are in short supply, and whether you want to protect jobs for people at home before you allow. We do not want, I don't want an expansion of the European Union with, as you say, Albania, Bosnia, Turkey waiting in the wings. Okay. That's my view, and the sooner you realise that and start adapting policies in the Commission instead of your desire for ever closer political regulation, then you're going to get a shock these elections, and let's bring them on.
Many thanks for that question. And I certainly will take on board to both our guests that we do want to make this a dialogue, so if you can keep your answers as short as possible. Now, if we could focus on...
Which part of the...
should
I answer?
Okay. It'd be good for you to say the general point, but I think specifically your first point was about regulation and the fact that there's a strong view in this country that the European Union doesn't get...
And about the last one, about enlargement. Now, you have in front of you somebody who has been first elected in 1979, and ever since I have been going through election campaigns, and I have won them. Now, I have ever since 1979 opposed publicly an inconsiderate enlargement of the European Union. And I have, since I am having the responsibility in my hand, I'm 15 years now in the European government, always had British governments and British parliamentarians and British commissioners who were going for more enlargement, more enlargement, more enlargement. I always warned against that, and I said it would be better maybe to have a reinforcement of what we have instead of going for enlargement. I'm very happy to hear now that the British point of view has changed. Good. Thank you. Second, I absolutely agree with you, sir. It is not possible when you are an SME, a small and medium-sized industry, that you have so many charges on you. And that is why some years ago, I do not know exactly how many years ago, we all together, that means the member states and the Commission, have charged a former Prime Minister of Bavaria, Mr. Stoiber, to analyze where the red tape is coming from and to tell us what kind of red tape has to be eliminated. Now, I give you very shortly some of the results. We have since that eliminated 5,600 European laws. 5,600. There is the number. Between 2007 and 2012, the weight of European regulations on SMEs has gone down by 26%. So that is what we have done, and we are continuing to do it. Second element of this answer. Many of the rules which we take in Europe are harmonization rules which actually eliminate red tape. David was just saying how I eliminated the roaming charges, which were heavy on the individuals and which didn't bring anything to open the market. I have put on the table lately the new rules on data protection, protection of personal data. Why? Because now we have 28 conflicting laws, and if you are an SME of Great Britain, and you want to utilize the whole of the internal market, you have to abide by 28 conflicting laws and asking 28 different authorizations. I say scrap the whole thing. One continent, one rule, one regulator. Alone per year, this is a saving for SMEs of 2.3 billion euros. And then a last sentence on this, and this doesn't come from me, it comes from Stoiber, CSU, you see, a rather conservative man. He came to the conclusion, after working now several years on this file, that the biggest red tape producer are the member states and the regions, because they overload. And he asked from the member states to make a refit exercise to see what can be eliminated. And by the way, what you quoted as heavy load are all decisions which are taken at the national level. What kind of taxes you have to pay, what kind of benefits you have to pay. All these are national decisions. So Stoiber is right. I think the regions and the member states should have a serious look at that because our SMEs are overburdened. I agree with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm absolutely certain that we'll come on later in the debate into further questions about the UK's relationship with the European Union and we'll come back to that later. I'll give David a chance to come back in later. But I've got another question which we'd like to put to you with your voting machines, if you could. Get them at the ready. This one is the question. Yes, here we are. For you, does Europe mean solidarity between member states? This is particularly relevant given the recent Eurozone crisis and the debate about the extent to which solvent member states should be helping out those that became insolvent as a result of the financial crisis. So if you could vote now, see whether you think that the spirit of all for one and one for all should apply in the European Union. With the music. Righty-ho. Well, yeah, solidarity seems to be...
Good.
Solidarity is good according to the Commissioner. Not so good.
I love you.
Not so good according to 20% of the audience. Okay, we're going to move on to the second theme now, which is your rights as citizens of the EU. And I take on board some of the points. Some people here probably don't consider themselves to be citizens of the European Union, notwithstanding the membership of Britain in the EU. So it's 20 years since this concept was created in the Treaty of Maastricht. And whatever your position is on the EU and Britain's part of it, these are rights which exist and they're yours to exercise. So I want to open up that debate, and it covers a lot of issues. There's another vote, for though, first of all, which leads us into the debate, which I'd like to get your machines out again for, which is, will you make your voice heard by voting at the European Parliament elections in May? Now, turnout in European elections, as with national elections, has been falling, I think, consistently ever since 1979 when direct elections were introduced. So will you be voting in the European Parliament elections in 2014? Okay.
Good.
Wow, very engaged European citizens here. I think if we get it's certainly a fraction of 89%. So well, I think the invitation to this event was. Well, we can come back to that question shortly. Now, the first question in this section is from Ella Vine. Is Ella here? Okay, Ella, yes. Microphone coming.
I'm a founder and chair of EU Citizens Vote campaign. We encourage non-British EU citizens to vote in elections of all levels. Unfortunately, non-British EU citizens residing in the UK without a British passport cannot vote in parliamentary elections and in referenda. The voting rights are fundamental human rights, and we would like to be able to vote, especially in situations like we witness now in the UK, when there are really negative influences and situations. For example, we can experience a referendum on the EU membership soon, and that will profoundly affect our lives.
Okay.
And so, Ms. Reding, we would like to have the right to vote.
Okay.
And what is the European Commission plan, and whether the European Commission is going to take any action on that and proceed to enable us to vote, and if yes, when and how?
Okay.
Well, you see, the European government can only do what is inscribed in the treaties. The treaties have been decided by the member states and by the national parliaments or through referenda. So it is very clear our treaties foresee so that as a European resident in a country, that means those people who normally live in a member state can vote in local elections and in European elections. They cannot vote in national elections. National elections are linked to the state, and the state, that is Great Britain, decides how these elections take place. Now, if Great Britain would allow the non-Brits to vote for the national elections, it could do that. But it is a purely national decision. What I have done lately, and you might have seen that is another phenomenon which is linked to the fact that only British people can vote for national elections here in Great Britain and for referenda. But when these British people have been living outside of Great Britain for quite a time, then they lose their right to vote. But they do not get the right to vote in the neighboring country because they are not of the nationality of that country. So they are disenfranchised. So you have a whole series of people who do not have any right to vote. And I have written to all member states saying, do something about that.
Okay.
If people want to vote, because there are people who still feel very British, even if they are living in Spain. Leave them to vote, but don't eliminate their right to vote. I can only make a plea to the member states on this. The member states have to decide.
You've made your plea. Here's a minister from the member state. So are you going to enfranchise voters? And in particular, David, could you answer the question about if you have your proposed referendum in 2017, will expatriate British citizens living in Spain or wherever be able to vote?
I mean, to deal with Ella's first point, I would say, as Viviane did, the treaties make it very clear the national franchise for national elections is a matter for individual member states to sort out, and certainly I would object and resist very strongly any attempt to alter the treaties to give that competence to EU institutions. I think it's quite right that those fundamental decisions about your national government or with a referendum that you talked about, whether the United Kingdom should remain a member of the EU or not, should be a matter for people, who are citizens of the United Kingdom. Now, I think that the expatriate issue is slightly different. We used to have a 20-year limit. It was reduced by the previous British government to 15. And a judgment was taken by Parliament and the then government as to how long you assessed it would be before somebody had been living abroad for such a long time that to all intents and purposes they'd sort of severed their link with their home country. I mean, we've not got any plans to change the current rules, although it's always kept under review, and it would go much further than Europe. Certainly, if you look at British citizens around the world, there's about 120,000 expats in Dubai at the moment. There's sort of large numbers in many parts of the world as well as in other EU member states. So it'd be a pretty big question to try and change that expatriate vote, take it beyond the 15 years.
Okay. The next question is from Lydia Best. Lydia? Is Lydia here? Lydia, yes. Beg your pardon. Lydia, yes. There's a microphone coming. Lydia.
Thank you. Vice President Reding, it's a great pleasure to see you in London. I represent European Federation of Hard of Hearing People. Yep. Better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, sorry. So I've got a question, directly to you. All European citizens with disabilities are eagerly awaiting the European Accessibility Act. What is the progress of the work on the Act? How this Act will strengthen our rights within the whole European Union? And also, what will be covered in the Act and how it will be hopefully implemented? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can give a very quick answer to this one because the European Union has lately joined the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. And I have myself intensively traveled to the United States in order to learn from their Disability Act. Because I always noted that in the United States, for instance, the access to buildings, to schools, to facilities is much easier than it is in Europe. So I am working since this time on an Accessibility Act for Europe. And I do believe that we could, with such a Accessibility Act do two things in the same time. And I look at David as a member of a government and having asked also for internal market to be reinforced. If we manage to have common European standards, those companies who construct the instruments you need or get experience in changing buildings or develop services for access could have a huge market. And this market is not only a market of people with disabilities, it's also a market for age. Because aging people, and we are an aging continent, become more and more disabled. So there is a huge market to take. We can develop, we can create jobs with this, I do believe, and we can do something in order to integrate better the European disabled people, be they disabled by nature, by accident, or by age, to our society. It's going to be a growing problem. I have seen some weeks ago delegations of small and medium-sized industry and bigger industry, also of tourism industries, and discussed with them how they see it, and I think we came to a good agreement that it would be a favorable thing to do.
Thank you very much. David, you want to make
very briefly, the area I represent in Parliament includes Stoke Mandeville, which is where the Paralympic movement started, so this is an important and interesting question for me. The answer on the proposed European action is that we're waiting to see what the text of that looks like, but certainly the British government is very keen to see all the European countries give high priority to greater access for people with all different types of disabilities. Now, one needs to do that in a way that acknowledges that sometimes making provision for new buildings, new developments, new buses and trains is easier than trying retroactively to adapt ancient buildings or modes of transport. So one needs to think about the detail to make sure one's getting that right, to make sure what you're doing is proportionate. But the principle that you're calling for, I absolutely support.
Okay, some questions from the floor, please. Yes, sir.
Michael Roberts, also from New Europeans. Minister, you said that any referendum on the UK's EU membership should be for British citizens. It might surprise the Commissioner to learn that what you actually mean, and what was in the Wharton bill that failed in Parliament recently, was voting not just for British people, but for Irish, for Maltese, for Cypriot nationals, indeed for Commonwealth nationals from all around the UK's Commonwealth partners. And also that in the vote to be held in September in Scotland, on Scotland's future, or possible declaring a declaration of independence, EU citizens from Poland, from France, from Germany, will be able to vote. Why all these strange anomalies?
Really?
Are they explicable? Are they justified? And surely the Minister would have another think about.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, very, very straightforward. The Commonwealth issue, as I'm sure that the gentleman knows, people from Commonwealth countries who have settlement rights in the United Kingdom have always been entitled to vote here. It's a historical experience. It derives from the fact that when these countries were originally part of the British Empire, there was a single British citizenship that covered everybody, whether they were in the United Kingdom itself or a colony. And it is simply a consequence of that approach over the years. And Ireland, there's been a special arrangement since Irish independence back in the 1920s that accounts for that position. The position as regards to the Scottish referendum is that the Scottish franchise follows for the referendum follows the franchise for Scottish elections. And so that is why there is a difference there. This is a referendum that the UK is facilitating, but derives from the Scottish government's electoral mandate to seek a referendum on independence.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, the lady at the back, right there.
I just wanted to ask about the work that you're doing to try and enforce the Charter on the fundamental rights. I'm thinking about the proposal for the rule of law mechanism. Excuse me. Because there seems to be some legal uncertainty right now in the UK about whether the UK has an actual quote-unquote opt-out from the Charter.
Okay, very topical question.
Yeah, there are two different things. The one is the opt-out, which the lady rightly said, which the UK has negotiated in the treaties, but this is an opt-out for criminal law measures. So everything which has to do with being in front of a court, in a criminal court, or security questions. So there is an opt-out which can be triggered by the UK at the end of this year. That means the UK would roughly be out of more than 100 European rules, which give a lot of rights to citizens. The second one is the rule of law. You know, this continent is built not only on a market, it is built on values. It is built on democracy. And one of these values, for instance, is the independence of the courts. It is a well-functioning constitutional court. It is the freedom of the press. So a lot of elements which are deeply entrenched in what we feel as Europeans are the basic values on which our democracies are built. Now, I always thought, wrongly so, that these values were firmly anchored in our democracies. And we have seen several times in the last years that this is not the case. Remember Hungary, where the independence of judges was eliminated, judges just thrown out of their responsibilities. Remember Romania, where the constitutional court was eliminated. Now, I had really to fight strongly in order to make this not to happen. 5 times in Hungary, they made the constitution worse for the rights of the individuals and for the democratic basic rights. 5 times I was fighting to get it right back in place. In Romania, I managed to have the constitutional court reinstalled. But that doesn't help. That was management by panic in a way. Something happens and I come in. And I could have had no success. And that is the reason why, also after a long discussion with the European Parliament, who has urged us to have some kind of mechanism for the rule of law, so that we can intervene when something is going wrong, and not only when something has gone wrong. Because now in the European treaties, the only way to intervene in such a case is to eliminate the voting rights of the member state who is misdoing. Now, that is meaning actually to put a member state out of the European Union. I consider that as the atomic bomb. And I think there should be measures before the atomic bomb, and that is why the Commission is going to put on the table in the next coming weeks some kind of a mechanism which triggers an observation if there is a negative development, for instance, independence of the court system or independence of the constitutional court. We want that there is something in the hands of the government so that we can start to stop at the beginning when such things are happening.
Okay, Viviane, I'll stop you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I was talking about, there's a debate right now in the UK about whether, what extent the Charter of Fundamental Rights can be applied in the UK.
Sorry, thank you. Can I bring David Liddington on this? Because the Conservative Party's view on this whole subject is fascinating, if not sometimes slightly confusing. if I may say it.
George, I'll have to invite you in for a tutorial or something. But no, I mean, I think the previous government, I think, did slightly exaggerate the point about opt-out. I mean, certainly our analysis is that there is not an opt-out, but what that declaration does is to make it clear that the Charter of Fundamental Rights does not create any new rights additional to those that are already there within the European treaties. I think that is the point that the declaration is supposed to make clear. I mean, on the rule of law mechanism, I mean, I can understand the argument that Viviane's putting, that at the moment, every member state is supposed to be committed to democracy, rule of law, independent courts, and so on, and there's no mechanism other than the nuclear weapon of simply withdrawing membership rights. But I do worry about the EU possibly trespassing onto new territory when there are specialist human rights institutions like the Venice Commission that are already doing an effective job, and about how you draw the line fairly between what might be an outrageous attempt to subvert the rule of law on the one hand, and on the other, the freedom that any democracy has to alter its own domestic arrangements as the result of a free and fair election. And I would be cautious about, if I saw attempts by the EU to sort of go too far in a direction I thought took it into trying to second guess what might be perfectly legitimate democratic decisions. What is the space in compliance with the rule of law for that national freedom and flexibility?
May I just give an answer? May I just give an answer? Complement of information. I agree with David that there is the equilibrium has to be kept. Well, if you see that a constitutional court just is eliminated, then this equilibrium has not been kept. And in order to do the work which we have done so far, and it was sometimes very difficult because there was nothing foreseen in order to intervene and to bring back the reason. We have worked very closely with the Venice Commission. The Venice Commission is this Council of Europe instrument with wise persons, mostly constitutional judges, old persons who have a whole life experience behind them and who analyze the constitutional problems in the member states. So this collaboration goes very narrowly, and I think the debate will be interesting. What shall be done, what will be necessary to be done in order to protect the values on which this continent is based without going into subsidiarity. And so that line to draw is not an easy one. I count on your help.
Can we go to a very practical question here from Maggie Hughes? Is Maggie there? Yeah. There's a microphone coming down to you, yeah.
Can I say welcome, Viviane? And, from all the millions of victims out there, a big, big thank you. I know everybody talks about the mobile phone, but for victims and their families, that is really near to my heart, as you know. Just a quick summary. My son became a victim of very, very serious crime abroad in 2008. He had a budding career that was cut short by a vicious attack. I did find a big struggle going to my own country to get help, support and advice. It just wasn't available. I then turned my energy, my strength and my stress to go into the commissioners, and especially Viviane. And eventually we did get the new EU Victims Law. I do feel a little bit let down as a victim's mum that our own country at the moment hasn't really pushed hard enough to support us. Because when we go out of this country, we are still British and we're still Europeans. But the trouble is, if you're in a situation like my family was, you become non-British because there's nowhere to turn. And as I said, we turn to Europe to get our help. And, we should be looking to the fact that as far as I'm concerned as a victim's mum, why couldn't I have got that same help from my own UK government?
It was one of the most moving moments when I met this woman. I was at that moment working on the rights of the accused in front of courts, so that when a British citizen travels abroad, lives abroad, that has the same right as all other citizens in front of the court in another member state. And you know there are 2.2 million Brits who are in that case, because you are the biggest exporter of people in the whole European Union. So I was working on the rights of the accused. And while I was doing that, and I'm not a lawyer nor a judge as by profession, I saw that, well, the one against whom the crime has been committed, the victim, is in our systems nowhere. And I thought that was not very fair. And then Maggie came and told me the story of her son, who had been badly beaten in a southern country and no way to help and so on and so forth. And Maggie was a trigger for me to make the same thing I did for the people who are accused, to make that same thing for the victims. And not only the victims themselves, because in the case of Maggie, Maggie was not a victim, but Maggie had a son as a victim who could not defend himself because he was in hospital. No, it was Maggie who had to defend the son. So also the family of the victims, that they have rights. We managed to make this law. I would like to thank the European Parliament, who has nearly unanimously voted for this law. And I would plead to you not to leave Britain out of this European law. It is about people. It's about people like Maggie, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. Okay. And we should give them the basic rights wherever they go if they or somebody of their family becomes a victim. I'm proud to say victims' rights are now in the statute book of the European Union. You should have it in your statute book too.
I'm not, since I don't know the details of Maggie's case, I'm not going to comment on that. It's difficult for me to sort of make any assessment of its merits. I would argue that we have, not only do we have in this country, good standards to try to support victims and their families, including significant government support over the years for organisations like Victims Support that are able to provide that sort of emotional response to victims. I mean, even as well as practical advice, I think even the best intentioned government official is not able to provide. But also through our consular service, not just in Europe, right around the world. And I know from the papers that come across my desk, the meetings, the conversations I have with members of Parliament on behalf of victims and victims' families whom they represent, that our consular teams in British embassies and high commissions are working constantly to help British citizens who are in difficulties in many, many different parts of the world. And there are thousands of such cases every year. Now, the approach that we take to individual justice and human rights dossiers is we look at them on their merits. We assess whether there would be an advantage to us, meaning to British people overall, in opting in to something. We look at whether it would make an appreciable difference to our standards, whether it would require us to alter in a significant way our own criminal justice systems, which are, of course, is a common law system. It's not like the majority of EU member states, which are established on a Roman law basis. And we take a quite dispassionate but balanced judgment on each one. And I think if you look at the record since the current government came in, we've opted into about half, and we've stayed out of about half of the new Justice and Home Affairs measures that have come before us. Now, obviously,
that was as long as Kenneth Clarke was minister.
Well, it's still I think if you look back at since May 2010, that's still been that's still been the case, Viviane. I think that, the position we have is that when we stay out of something, it is always open to us at a later stage to opt in, post-adoption, to that EU measure. And those are things that my colleagues, the ministers in the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice, do keep under review the whole time. And I'm sure that they would take very seriously representations from victims groups in this country.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm quite keen to maintain a sort of balance of views in this debate, and I'm conscious the chap over here in the burgundy sweater has already asked a question, but I feel if you would like to make a point succinctly, that would be good, and the microphone's coming down in your direction.
I'd like to just support the Minister's statement there. We have in this country a very historic system of justice and criminal justice. It meets all the requirements of human rights. That may not be the case in other countries. You've alluded to Southern Europe, to Hungary. They are other countries. I'm very happy with the system here, and if I had to have any choice between opting for a British system of justice and someone from abroad, I would go for the British system. We have a wonderful consul service, we have a wonderful foreign office that looks after people abroad, and we don't need it prescribed in Brussels when we can decide these things ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for making that point so succinctly. Can we pass the microphone back to the chap behind you who's been trying to get in?
May I make one comment here? In the past, there have been a number of issues where the British government has been taken to the European Court of Human Rights and has had to have its knuckles rapped because
So get rid of our terrorists by deportation.
All right, okay, thank you, sir.
you couldn't get rid of it because of your common law, not because of the European law.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, thank you very much for that part of the debate. I'm sure we're going to take some more general points in a minute, but we're about to watch a very short video, I believe. This is about the European elections coming up in May and the issues that are going to be raised. Obviously going to be a fascinating contest, and I think one of the things that we as journalists will be looking at will be the extent to which populist parties, Eurosceptic parties across Europe do well in these elections, and we know from the opinion polls that it's quite possible that the UK Independence Party will win the European elections in the UK, similar forecasts for the French National Front. So it's going to be a fascinating set of elections, and I think this video will set out some of the background to them.
Finde ich, gehört wirklich europäische Solidarität gezeigt, und hier müssen auch alle Staaten zusammen eine Lösung finden.
Es domāju, ka nevajadzētu lieki tērēties, ja tas būtu iespējams. Vajadzētu labāk tiešām savilkt jostu.
Eine Währungsunion hat mit einer gemeinsamen Währung wie den Euro in der EU, dann braucht man definitiv auch eine gemeinsame Kontrolle über die Banken.
Uważam, że scentralizowany system bankowy jest bardziej potrzebny Europie, gdyż to pomoże jej uniknąć kryzysów.
Pienso que la Unión Europea necesita una tasa sobre el sector financiero.
Une taxation européenne n'a pas de sens pour les fonds financiers.
What would be the difference between the European army and what we already have with the UN and NATO? And so at the moment I don't really see the usefulness.
Είμαι υπέρ της ύπαρξης ευρωστατού προκειμένου να προσπίζονται τα σύνορα και συμφέροντα των κρατών μελών στην ολότητά τους.
Sono a favore di una politica sull'immigrazione più aperta, ma che sia gestita a livello europeo in maniera comune.
Nesu už imigraciją ir manau, kad ES šalis turėtų būti mažiau atviros imigracijos procesams.
De kosten om de Europese milieuwetgeving na te komen maakt het voor Europese bedrijven in tijden van crisis moeilijk om competitief te blijven ten opzichte van landen zoals China of India.
Yhteinen ympäristölainsäädäntö takaa
Great. Well, I hope that's captured some of the issues. And I think our past experience of European elections in this country, and I suspect in many other European countries, is that Europe is sometimes barely mentioned by some of the mainstream politicians. It's campaign fought on largely national issues. And I suspect this year's European elections will be slightly different, certainly in the UK, where you've got the UK Independence Party certainly will be making a strong European case in one direction, and the Liberal Democrats and Nick Clegg saying that he will make it unequivocally pro-European campaign for his party. So I think European issues will be at the fore. 2014 is going to be a year of change for the European Union with a new European Parliament and a new European Commission about to be elected. So this is the starting point ready for our final theme of the day, which can be fairly general actually. It's where we want to draw out from you some of your views on the future direction of the European Union. And to get the ball rolling, the first question is going to come from Alessandro Fusco, who's in the second row back.
Hello, my name is Alessandro and I'm the chair of the Young European Movement in London. So as you can guess, obviously I'm a pro-European and I'm keen to get information and engage with the European Union for my organization. And I sometimes and often find difficult to do this because when I go and try to on the Commission website, Parliament website, the various institution website, I find that these websites are very difficult to navigate. The information is often hidden. The links are do not work well, and so on and so forth. What I think is if myself, a person who is a pro-European, who's keen to engage, finds it difficult to find this information, what about all the other people who are disengaged and the European Union wants to connect with them? How will you do it if you don't have the platform to do it? So will you look at this? Will you look at how to provide an interlinked platform? And I think that Mr. Liddington can speak about the example of gov.uk, which is a platform which might not be maybe the nicest one, but is quite effective in interlinking the various government departments. And it could be a good example for the Commission and the EU institutions.
Okay, is that a common complaint, Viviane?
Yes, I have heard that already. I have 3 boys and they bring their friends around and they all say the same thing. Now, I am of an age where I cannot do that. I need you young people to help us to do that because you are, well, I am on Twitter all the time, but you would like to have a much more simpler access to information. And I think we should much more learn from young people the way they know to handle the social media and so on and so forth. But there is something, nevertheless, I would like to say here, and agreeing with you that it is too complicated, should be an easier access. We have something which is extraordinary, and that is Europe Direct, where you can come, any citizen can come with any question and will to one single entry point and will get an answer. We have 1 million questions per year on this 1 million answers, so there it works. But maybe if you want specific questions more generally, we could improve. We are speaking to each other later on. How you and your people can help us to be more youth-friendly on this.
Okay, thank you very much. David, I won't invite you to comment on the brilliance or otherwise of the British government's website. Okay, I'm going to open up for comments, and I'll start with the lady in the middle of the third row.
Thanks very much. My name's Tamara Flanagan. I'm from EU Matters and New Europeans. I actually submitted a question about this very point. Websites go far enough, but not everybody uses websites. And many European countries, and particularly the UK, we have a terrible information deficit. Most people in the UK aren't interested in Europe, unlike what you might think being in this room, don't have the extreme views or the pro views. But they don't have good information either. I don't think it's any surprise to say that we have an anti-European press in the UK, and this makes getting objective information, and I'm afraid to tell you that people don't count the European representation as objective information, they think it's just pro, out to the public generally. So my question was actually about a locus in member states where ordinary people can think and talk about the future of Europe. I was very surprised to learn that they have in Finland They have meetings every summer, public meetings, to which people are invited to talk about what Finland thinks it's going to contribute going forward to the European Union. I mean, that's the most extraordinary concept in the UK. We don't even have much scrutiny in Parliament or much public. The BBC runs a programme which tells us what happens in Parliament, and sometimes we hear there what happened about European legislation going through. But generally speaking, I think a locus for more discussion about Europe in the UK, which is not influenced by the media or the European Commission, I'm afraid to say, would be very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Viviane, as well as taking the general point there, I just wondered if you'd like to comment from your own experience of the British debate on the European Union generally. Do you find it balanced and informative?
When I speak with people, eye to eye, and I answer their question, then I see the question marks in their eye. So they make affirmations, and then I answer them, I give them the tools, and then they start to question. I think you have in this country, have been told, a tradition of debate. And I really wonder why you do not exercise this tradition of debate also concerning European affairs. Because you are at the verge of having maybe, I don't know, but that is a national decision, to take very important decisions. About what? Do the people who are asked to vote know what they are going to vote about? I don't care what kind of personal decision you take. The only thing I care for is that you take an informed decision, whatever your decision be. And that is exactly the reason why last year I launched the European Year of Citizens, because I saw that there was this deficit, this hunger sometimes of knowing more, of going to a trusted source. And a trusted source, I am a trusted source, you see. You get an object from me, an objective answer. You do with this answer what you think. But you do not need only to have me as a trusted source. You can also have him and somebody else, and then make up your own mind. The fact is that very often I see a completely distorted truth being presented. And then how do you want people to make an informed decision? They simply can't. If I read the papers, well, I have read yesterday in a paper that the floods are the fault of Brussels. Yeah, okay, good. I didn't know I am so powerful I can make the rain fall and the rain stop. At any rate, I don't certainly not want to joke about the floods, because the poor people who are in the midst of it, it's not for laughing, actually. But you see what is behind it. I mean, you cannot discuss like that, and that is why I hope. And I hope also that before the next elections, the facts and figures will be on the table, so that people can make their own advised judgment. I see that in those member states where the debate is not taking place, the people do not go to vote for the European election. Why should they? For what should they vote? They don't know. They, for instance, do not know that the most powerful parliament in Europe, sorry, is the European Parliament. Why? Because the European Parliament is co-decider with the member states on European laws. And European laws then are integrated into national laws in the member states. So 70% of the laws in this country are made co-decided by the European Parliament. So it is not neutral whom you send to the European Parliament. Do you send to the European Parliament parliamentarians who have a say? I know many of your parliamentarians who really do have a say. Okay. I speak, for instance, about Malcolm Harbour, who is the president of the Interior Affairs, of the Common Market Affair, of Madame McCarthy, who is deciding on banking regulation. So you do have very responsible parliamentarians in most political groups, but something which is going to be non-responsible is to have the populists from the left and to the right who are going to shout but not going to participate in drawing laws. And that are wasted votes, simple.
Okay.
I want to make that known.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, point well made. I think some people in Britain might contest whether the European Parliament is indeed the most important parliament in Europe. I mean, if you consider the issues that people vote on in a British general election, most of those issues are not directly affected by decisions in the European Parliament, I think would be fair to say. Anyway.
Why does the Commission have the right to initiate legislation when it's unelected officials?
Okay. That's a fair point, but it's slightly off the subject. So I'm going to ask David to come back on the issue of whether you feel.
No, wait.
No, don't, because that's a different question. What I'd like to know is, do you think the British public are well informed on Europe and are in a position to make an informed judgment in May in the European elections?
Oh, I think it's very dangerous to start to any politician or even a distinguished journalist to start making assumptions about what makes somebody qualified to cast a vote. You know, we've got a universal democracy, and ultimately it's up to individual citizens to decide what sources of information from the media and elsewhere they want to access. And, you know, people can choose to read one of the newspapers that takes a very hostile view to the EU. They can choose to read George's paper, which takes a significantly more pro-EU view. They can listen to the BBC, so they have a choice available to them before you even get to the internet. I mean, I think the reality is that it's not just in the UK that there is a problem over voting in European Parliament elections. I mean, there are some countries, and I think Luxembourg is one where the turnout is relatively high. But if you look right across the EU as a whole, you have relatively low turnouts compared with national elections, and you have elections that, let's be frank, tend to turn on how hard people think they want to kick their national government they've got at any one time. So it's 28 national elections. It goes back to my earlier point about there not being a European demos. For good or ill, that, I think, is the reality. It's one reason why I don't believe the answer to the democratic deficit in Europe is to give still more powers to the European Parliament. There's some good, decent, hard-working expert people there, yes. But giving them extra powers has not made people throughout Europe somehow feel more in touch, more represented than they were previously. In fact, the disillusion, if anything, is greater than it has been before. Now, I think what is it we could do? I mean, there's an issue about, you know, EU reform we can perhaps go on to later, but to respond to the latest points directly, I think there's some things we could do at national level. I wouldn't decry what we do in this country in terms of scrutiny, but I think we could improve it. I would love to see our departmental select committees mainstream more European business. So the Treasury Committee looked at some of the banking regulation questions at an early stage, or retrospectively, you know, have these EU measures done the job that we were promised they would do? You know, look at it from 2 years or 5 years after legislations and assess in a parliamentary committee what it's meant in practice. That, I think, would be worth doing. The other thing I think is at European level is that everybody in the EU, whether I think Commission, Council, European Parliament, should be focusing on those things that are real priorities for the people who we're all supposed to be there to represent. And too often the comfort zone is to talk about institutions, to use jargon that is incomprehensible to most ordinary citizens of whatever country they come from. And actually the things, you know, roaming charges, cheap air flights, you know, EasyJet tells me they would not be operating as a serious business if it were not for that single market in aviation within the EU for domestic flights. You know, those things matter to people. Job creation matters to people. You know, making it easier for small businesses to grow matters to people. Those are the things that Europe should be showing it's concentrating on.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, at the back there, sir.
Just on the sort of European deficit and the elections and things, I think to address the lady's point over there and our commentators down here, the main issue is that in Britain, we don't really seem to have a choice as to our options. It is either in a little bit, mostly in, or all the way in. There isn't any real debate going on at a national level about the benefits of our membership, for which I'm slightly sceptical, but there is still no debate, so the information isn't coming down. So it's up to our national politicians to drive that debate and give us the information that we, the people, want, such as proper trade figures of the rest of the world, etc. So I don't think it's the EU's job, and it would seem very heavy-handed for them to come in and direct that debate. Our politicians have avoided, our mainstream politicians have avoided that debate because they know, deep down, which way the British people would actually choose.
But do you not feel that with Nigel Farage, the debate is starting to kick off about the benefits of exit?
It's necessarily reached that stage yet. I think there are a lot of MPs who have views that they are not willing to express. And to open up the debate would be refreshing just to allow the people a say.
Okay, well, that's a good point. I'm going to take another question actually now. Yes, just the microphone's just behind you.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. I'm Nigel Perkins, I'm English, and I get absolutely fuming mad at the lies and misinformation that comes out day in, day out from our politicians, the gutter press in this country about Europe. And I'd like to ask these people who go on about Europe being this nasty, nasty thing there, what is so bad about the European Union? Because I can't think of anything that's that bad about it. And what's it...
Okay.
And maybe in as an alternative, you know, what are the three good things about the EU? Because there are a lot of good things, and they're not being said.
Okay, very good. I'm going to take a third question. Is anyone here who can think of some bad things to say about the European Union? Yes, that's just the gentleman at the back there.
Welcome, Viviane Reding. It's amazing to see you here. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm sorry if I'm going to say something as an Englishman, which is somewhat controversial. And I'd like to direct this primarily at the Minister. Sir, the approach of the last two successive governments towards immigration has been neither rational nor considered nor pragmatic. It has been a wholesale betrayal of British workers, and there are millions of British people suffering who are now out of work, who are on benefits or out of education, who because of the excessive immigration from EU countries, particularly East European countries, are now no longer able to find opportunities in their own country, and they've got nowhere to go. And that, sir, is why this issue needs addressing, because you must look after British and Commonwealth citizens first in this country and not prioritise the needs of EU citizens. As much as the European Union has been a fantastic thing for guaranteeing peace and stability in Europe since the Second World War, there is no doubt about that. But Britain has a primary responsibility to British and Commonwealth citizens and not to the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much for that point. Okay, David, to you first.
Yeah, I can't just help saying to the gentleman at the back there that, I mean, if members of Parliament have been shy about expressing their views on Europe, I've yet to see much sign of it in the debates I take part in. I mean, the gentleman here raises a very, very serious point. And I think that there's no doubt that there is very widespread public concern about immigration in this country. Now, that is not solely a consequence of migration from other countries in the EU. If you look at the figures, roughly 50% or so is from countries outside the EU, 35% from EU member states, 15% UK citizens returning to the UK. And a huge number of the people who are coming from the third countries are people who are coming in order to marry British citizens or other people who have settled rights of residence here. But there's no doubt that people here have seen in the last 15 years a huge increase in the overall population. In fact, 2.2 million is one estimate I've seen. That has put pressure on things like housing supply. It is part, not only the only reason, it's part of the reason for the arguments about planning and housing in southeast England. It's put pressure in certain places, not everywhere, on schools, with schools having to cope with significantly more children whose home language is not English, and therefore question how you deal with that. But I do want to push back at what you said, particularly as regards employment, because it is a fact that the majority of people, certainly from elsewhere in the EU who've come here, are working and paying taxes and contributing. And one of the problems we've had as a country is that our employers, hotel industry, horticulture industry, is saying to politicians, look, we actually have to have these people. And I think that is why the present government has given such priority to reform of welfare, so that people here do not have any sort of easy choice of going on to welfare as opposed to taking work, even if it's not the first work that they would prefer to have. And why we've given such a high priority to education reform and to a much greater emphasis on vocational education and on training than our predecessors did. That's what's going to get those unemployed young people into work and make them really attractive in the eyes of British and other employers to whom they want to apply. And there is some evidence already that whereas if you go back 5-6 years, you would have seen more than half of newly created jobs being filled by people who were not born in the UK, those figures have now been more than reversed. And you've now got the majority of newly created jobs being taken by people who are UK born. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but it's been those supply-side reforms on education and on welfare that have been absolutely key to doing this.
Viviane Reding, you
Yes.
have some strong views in this area, I believe.
Well, my first strong view is that this European Union has been built on the freedom not to be discriminated. We have 507 million citizens on our space, and they have the same rights and the same obligations wherever they go. Now, Europe is not a country of migration like the United States is.
Okay.
It's not a space of migration like the United States are. In the United States, you have 3% of the population which is migrating between the different states. In Europe, it is 0.4%. So it is a very small number of citizens which migrate. Here in this country, very interesting, and David has said the facts and figures, 2.2 million British people go out, and you have roughly the same amount of non-British people coming in. He has given now the delimitation of those. Now, I am only responsible for the free movement of European citizens. Now, this free movement of European citizens has been put into laws. And these laws say very clearly what are your rights to move, but also what are your obligations to move. For instance, a citizen who moves from outside of Great Britain to Great Britain has the right to be here during 3 months freely, but during this 3 months has no rights for benefits, for social benefits. And after 3 months, this citizen has to demonstrate that he or she is self-sustained, not a burden on the social benefit system of this country, which is very fair, I believe, because it is a free movement to travel, to study, to work, but it is not a free movement into welfare, very clearly. Now, who are those citizens from other member states who come here? Most of them, 77%, come to work. And even if that is so, now I compare it to the figures. How many of those citizens who come from Europe work? 77%. How many citizens from the UK work? 72%. How many citizens from third countries, that means neither UK nor Europe, work? 60%. How many citizens receive welfare benefits? Well, the first figure is evident, 93% of UK citizens. That's normal because it's your country, your welfare system. How many EU citizens receive welfare in this country? 2.1%. How many non-EU citizens receive welfare? 4.8%. So I think you should know these figures before you start a real discussion about the problems. And I do agree with all the governments. And for this reason, I have tomorrow a big meeting of mayors of different towns and villages from all over European Union. The Vice Mayor of London will also be present in order to discuss with them the problems which they have to face. Because the problem which we face in Europe with the immigration, with the migration of European citizens, is a minority problem. The majority of the people come to work, they contribute, they are net contributors. You have a small minority of people, which creates real difficulties. And very often they are all sitting one on the other on one spot. And then you have mayors of some cities who say, now how can I handle this? The stress on my education, on the schools, the stress on housing, the stress on work, the stress on health. And it is a very big stress. And that's why tomorrow I'm sitting together with these mayors, telling them what are the rules under which they can operate, telling them also what is the help the European Union provides, because the money which can go to these villages, to those cities, in order to invest into houses, in order to help education system is subsequent, is a lot of money. But the mayors have to know that they can get this money. Very often the mayors don't know, just as the citizens don't know for what they are voting.
Viviane, can I ask you a very...
And so I think this information has to go through.
Okay.
And actually it was a red thread through the whole evening. A lot of people asked for more information. Be it for citizenship, be it for economy, be it for SMEs, be it for going to vote. And I believe that, yes, the crux of the matter is there. If everybody would know better what are the possibilities, what are the downfalls, what are the advantages, then the coming in and helping to build our common space would be much more strong. And I hope that you can have this debate really in this country so that people can choose knowing what they are choosing.
Okay, very good. Now, in a minute, we're going to have our last, in a second, we're going to have our last vote. But while we get the vote ready, can I just ask a very short and simple question? Do you think, as David Cameron has suggested, that benefit tourism is a factor in the European Union, particularly in the UK?
Well, I think I gave you the facts and figures now.
Do you think people travel to the UK specifically to claim benefits?
Yeah, people travel also. You see, you have those 77% of people who come here in order to work. They contribute. But you have in all societies, in my small Luxembourg, you have most people who come there for work. By the way, we have 42% of non-Luxembourgers in Luxembourg. Most of them are there for work. But you always have the exceptions for benefits, for doing things which are abuse, for things which are illegal. Now catch those who are doing abuse and leave the others live in peace.
Great, thank you. Right, so... Before we take our last round of questions, I'd just like to get your voting machines out again. And this is a question which goes back, I mean, it's still a live debate, but it's certainly very live a few years ago when the European External Action Service was set up, sometimes known as the European Foreign Service, about whether the European Union should speak with a single voice on the international stage. And some of those themes were picked up in the video you saw earlier about European armies and so forth. So do you think the EU should speak with one voice on the international stage? If you could vote, that would be good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Seems
But people understood it. Huh?
2/3 of people seem to think it's a good idea for the European Union to speak with a single voice. And we've certainly seen that in action, actually, in the case of Iran recently and to a certain extent in Syria, I guess. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a final round of questions. We've got 10 minutes before we have to wind up. So you can make these questions as general as you like. And maybe what I'll do is I'll take a few comments and questions from the floor and then ask David and Viviane to sum up at the end. So we'll try and take as many as we can. If we keep the questions as short as possible. Let's start up there. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Hi. My name is Marie. I work for SME, a creative SME based in East London called Body Data Space, and we just launched a big project called Women Chief Digital. It's a European project, so you can guess my question. First, I'm French. I'm a French citizen, and I've been living in the UK for 4 years now, and I really hope I'm bringing to this country as much as it's bringing to me. So that's the first thing I want to say. So my question really regards the involvement of women, and especially young women, in the technological and digital economy in Europe. So there's been this very interesting report by the European Commission recently showing that EU economy overall is lacking 9 billion euros a year because of the lack of involvement of women in IT sector. So I'm just wondering, what is the EU? We know it's a big focus of the EU at the moment, and Nelly Kroes has been speaking about it in that sense. So what is the EU planning to do to empower young women with the right creative skills they need now? Because we know it's a big challenge, and there's not enough women in tech in the UK and also in the EU.
Great, thank you very much.
So, yeah.
That's excellent. Chap here in the blue shirt.
Hello, my name is Alan Gelfer. I have a question about the external borders of the Union, asylum and refugee policy. As a citizen of the Union, I look with shame with the episodes of Lampedusa and people washing on Europe's shores, and also I'm staggered by what I hear about the amounts of money that we spend on external agencies like Frontex, which seem to just play into the hands of traffickers. So my question really is, what has the European Union learned from this? How can we move forward with this? And is this really, are we not in an age where we really need a sensible policy about burden sharing rather than putting the emphasis on the poorer southern countries?
Okay, thank you very much. Gentleman right at the back there.
Thank you. My name is Christopher MacLehose. I'm a book publisher. Are either of your speakers going to do anything about the negligible sums of tax that, for example, Amazon pay in Europe?
Thank you very much. And the lady at the back.
There's been a lot of money put in from the EU and governments into computer technologies. But what about technology in general, in terms of infrastructure, nuclear, and does the EU actually have an industrial manufacturing strategy for the Union? One other quick question. Have you heard of Tech Shop? This is an initiative in 7 states in the USA. It's a membership association where you can pay daily, monthly, or annual fees, and you have access to the full range of industrial equipment and machinery. You can build your own projects. There's also regular classes. We're talking laser cutting, electronics, all kind 3D printing, the whole lot. So it's something that students, unemployed people, also youth, school pupils can learn sort of more medium to heavy industrial skills.
Okay.
That can create good paying jobs.
Great, thank you very much. And one last one. Maybe, sorry, down, can we have the microphone down at the front here? So the last question. I'm on. Here we go.
Hi, Ju. I'm actually very likely the world-leading scientist in my field, which is bomb disposal, including nuclear bombs. And I'm appalled at the way the human race organise itself in order to deal with one another. We have, for instance, on the upper level, we have the United Nations, which represents the interest of the 5 Permanent Security Council members who have nuclear weapons, and they then, without any international legal basis, tell every other country, you can't have nuclear weapons, because we got them. And by the way, you can only join us for 2 years, and then that's your lot. Now, when we come down to Europe, I think this is a much more positive attempt to try and get like-minded people to work together. But I'm going to defend the British people here because it is our governments, Labour and sort of Conservative, who have changed their foot from left to right, in, out, shake it all about. And the majority of the public, who might well be interested in perhaps Coronation Street, rely on directions from our government. And the continual change in mind is no wonder that we become totally disenchanted with being in Europe or out of Europe. And, you know, unfortunately, it's generating a feeling that, you know, isn't particularly positive. On the question of human rights, I'll come back to our friend up here. It might be surprising for people to know there is no international law upon which human rights are based. There's the Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations, the 48 countries that declare that. But when your human rights are contravened, you've got no legal basis in international law.
Okay.
In the European EC human rights, they have cherry-picked some of the human rights, but they still rely on the governments themselves to have adopted or ratified their own particular brand of human rights, like we have in the United Kingdom in 1998, for them to actually act against us. And unfortunately, now we've got David Cameron, and aided by Theresa May, who, as a result of the extradition of Abu Qatada back to Jordan, who was claiming his human rights, they now want to repeal our human rights.
Okay.
I think this is appalling direction from people who should have more intelligence collectively to give us more direction.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we've got a bit of a potpourri of final questions there. Women in the workplace, frontier management, human rights, industrial policy, and the tax arrangements of Amazon and similar multinational companies. Maybe I could ask my colleagues to pick up on 1 or 2 of those themes each, and then maybe make some concluding remarks about the fascinating debate we've had here today.
As being the woman on this panel, I think I have to answer the woman question. I have heard by somebody saying today, well, when I'm looking at the British government, I see all grey suits. When I'm looking at the governments in general, with some exceptions, and everybody knows the exceptions. And when I'm looking at the economy in general, I see a lot of grey suits. Women are missing out in our economy. Women are missing out in politics. And I think we have to do something about this, because it has also to do with democracy. If you want an equilibrated representation of people, well, we are 50%. And we should also have a greater say in political decision-making. We find ourselves nearly nowhere in economic decision-making. I'm very grateful to this wonderful man, Lord Davis, who has, with his energy, tried to bring to the British industry the understanding that they are losing out talent if they are not giving a chance to this female talent which we have. And by the way, we do not have a choice. Do you know that we are an aging society all over Europe, with the exception of France? Now, we need talent, and half of the talent is female. Do you know that 60% of university graduates are women? Now, where are they later after university? And I'm fighting for this really because I do believe that we need this talent on board, that we need this talent in politics, that we need this talent in our economy. Now, what has been said on the digital sector, that is a real nightmare. But it is a nightmare also for males. Because we have been speaking about unemployment. There is this wonderful portal for employment in Europe. It's called EURES. It has 1.6 million jobs which are asked for, which are missing. The most of those are British employers who ask for jobs, for people to come to work. And most of these jobs are in the technical level. Now, I hope that one day we will inform women that technology doesn't bite. For the time being, they think it, and I would like to get more women into this education. What other question you like me to?
Why don't you talk about Amazon and their tax arrangements?
Yeah, taxation is in the hands of national states. They decide upon this, and we do have things which are not normal. No, nobody likes taxes, nobody. But if everybody has to give its fair share to taxes, then it is all right. If you see that your neighbor or the company next to you is not giving its fair share, then you become very upset, and rightly so. And I do believe that we collectively, all the member states, find ways in order to close these shocking holes where very big companies end up to pay taxes nowhere. That cannot be. They do that legally, by the way. It is not illegal. So let's make that this is not legally possible anymore. I am not a believer in high taxes. I am a believer in lower taxes, but taxes for all who have to contribute according to their possibility. So
that's perfect. Thank you very much.
No other.
I think we can get David to respond to. Thank you very much.
Right. Of course, those tax issues were a key element in the agenda for the G8 summit in Northern Ireland last year, and this is something that has to be taken forward not just on a European but on an international level. There's no point in having some great sort of EU agreed regime on corporate taxation to find that the beneficiaries are the United States or the United Arab Emirates or other jurisdictions elsewhere in the world, because the businesses simply locate their headquarters functions there. On Alan's point about asylum and refugee policy, I mean, my view is if we're looking at this longer term, trying to find a strategic answer, it is to use things like the EU's neighbourhood policy and its development instruments to try to assist those countries from which people are fleeing, so that it becomes much less desirable for them to abandon their roots and to go in search of a better and more secure life in Europe or elsewhere in the world. On the other questions raised, I mean, I just wanted to take the final question, so the gentleman down here, we need to ask about the British people and how they would take their view. What was the right view for people to come to? I mean, I'm very clear. I believe membership of the European Union, for all the criticisms I make about it, I think membership overall is in the United Kingdom's national interest, but I believe that the EU does need some serious reforms, not just in this country's interest, but in the interests of every single member state around this continent. And somebody else asked about technology. Now, there are some European spending programs on technology, but one of the things that's worrying me is that Europe is now in danger, because of its over-precautionary approach, of cutting itself off from some of the key technological developments of the 21st century. I think it is madness for the European Union to turn its back on nanotechnology or life sciences or GM technology and simply see those technologies migrate to North America or to China, because if that's what happens, that's where the business innovation is going to follow and where the jobs are going to follow as well. So Europe needs to be more competitive, dynamic and innovative. That takes us right back to that economic reform agenda of single market trade and regulation yet again. And then on the political front, I want to talk up to the poll, George. So Europe should speak with one voice in the world. Yes, Iran was a good example where that worked because everybody agreed. There was a consensus. And I would resist strongly any attempt to shift from unanimity to majority voting over issues of foreign policy or defence cooperation. Just imagine the logic of that majority voting. It would have meant, theoretically, that 2 years ago, Germany would have been forced by majority vote not only to acquiesce in, but to perhaps send forces to go and take part in an operation in Libya, which the German government, with the support of its voters, was strongly opposed to participating in. Now, you only have to sort of think those things through to see why it's important that we have a Europe that in foreign policy and elsewhere respects the democratic rights of the individual member states that make up the Union. And I think that provided those rights are respected, provided we get a Europe that's more dynamic and competitive, we can get a Europe that is going to actually command the confidence of electorates, both in the United Kingdom and throughout the continent of Europe. And I do believe we need a referendum in the UK. I'm with the Prime Minister in saying that is the only way in which we will sort this issue out definitively in the UK and have an answer that everybody is prepared to accept and row in behind. I think the challenge for Europe as a whole, it's not just about Britain. It's about how does Europe reconnect with its citizens and how does Europe compete in a global marketplace where to get the jobs and the opportunities, we are going to have to change our ways of thinking and our ways of working quite dramatically.
Great. No, actually, sorry. I tell you what, thank you very much, David. We've run out of time, but this gives me a good opportunity to say, actually, that I apologise for not getting around to all the questions here today, because I know that we've covered a lot of ground. But if you have things to add or questions you'd like answers to, I'm told that the organising team have put a box outside in which you can drop your questions, or you can email at the address given. Or if there are specific issues on which you need advice, there's the Europe Direct Contact Centre, which is available on a free phone number, unlike some of the payphone helplines the British government operates, which is 00800 678 91011. Now, I think a common theme of today's debate has been a view that possibly the European debate, in this country especially, is characterised by a lack of information. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to our two speakers today for helping to fill in some of the gaps in our knowledge, and I think it's been a really informative session. So David Livington and Viviane Reding, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. But actually, most of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody who's been in the audience today and contributing online as well, because it's been a really fascinating debate. On your way out, please leave your little voting machines on your chairs. They'll be collected. And many thank you, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.